right, so it was impressed upon me to hop to Genesis 5 today instead of 4 because we wanted to have the name list while we were eating. Thought we might make it more bearable for us all, I guess. What we did not pay attention to is Genesis 4 also has a genealogy list, so we're still going to get it when we go back. But you do get half a chapter of Cain and Abel, so should be all right. Actually, some interesting things in Genesis 5, whether you ever would have thought that before or not. But let's start out with reading a couple verses. We'll start down at the end. Mike, do you want to read verse 1?
This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created.
Okay, so note that it says he called their name Adam. I think the idea there is just that Adam is a representative term for mankind in general. Whether that was literally his official name, I don't know, or whether he was just talking about that being that we are, beings from the earth. It's interesting either way. But this portion of the Genesis account once again notes that mankind is both man and woman made in the image of God. As we've talked about, that heavily introduces the idea of dominion. And sometimes people are kind of weird about that thought. They think, God made us and God made us to have dominion, but, sometimes people get kind of finicky about what that really means and what we can do with it. God made us to use the earth and subdue it. He intended for us to be creative, and in that way we are his image. He intended for us to make things and create and have the authority over it. There's also the point that we are like God in our self-consciousness and our moral culpability and possibly even in tripartite nature. So just some interesting little tidbits there. But verse 3, go ahead and read that.
And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness and after his image, and called his name Seth.
All right, how many of you guys are looking forward to having your first, at least written about child at 130? So, all right, sounds like we're going to pass on that.
Do you think that Adam had children before Seth, though?
I know he had at least 2. I would say
Yeah, that's right, he did.
that's the downside to jumping to chapter 5.
That's true.
But yes, and I would say that one of the things that's not mentioned here is it doesn't mention any daughters. It doesn't mention anything like that, but they definitely would have had daughters, especially because they had to marry someone, which seems weird, I know, don't
Yeah.
Next paragraph.
Yeah. But, even to the point when Abraham was around, Abraham had married his half-sister. So, it wasn't that uncommon then. It became uncommon enough that God decided he could make a law against it in the law of Moses. It wasn't needful eventually, and it began to be unhealthy after a while. So, but when there's only 5 people on the earth, then you might,
That's right.
you don't have a whole lot of options there.
I can honestly say, if I were the only person on earth, I wouldn't marry you if you were the only man. But they did.
But they did, and we won't stay there too long. All right. Note here that Adam's offspring, specifically Seth, Cain and Abel are not mentioned in this chapter. Were instead made in Adam's image, and not, it doesn't say in God's, but in Adam's image. So now reasons for this and what it means are speculatory, but it's hard to think that the fall of man doesn't play a part into them being made in Adam's image instead of God's. As we go through the chapter, you see God's promise of death for sin playing out consistently. Matthew Henry said this, though. He said, "This was Adam's own likeness, the reverse that of the divine likeness in which Adam was made. But having lost it himself, he could not convey it to his seed. Note, grace does not run in the blood, but corruption does. A sinner begets a sinner, but a saint does not necessarily beget a saint." And so I was like, man, that was really nice. Totally writing that down. You know, it also ought to be noted, seeing as how we skipped past chapter 4 to hop here, you need to hear this last verse in chapter 4. Genesis 4:26, it says, "And to Seth, to him that there was born a son, and he called his name Enos, and began men to call upon the name of the Lord." So it was at that point, Seth's son, or maybe Seth and his son, seemed to be the first people after, to call upon the name of the Lord. So many assume Genesis 5 then is the holy line of Adam's posterity. It's Seth's line. It may be ones that were believers in some sense, because it doesn't list all of Seth's kids. It only names specific ones. And part of that is because you had to get to Noah, because that's going to be the next large important story in the context. But many believe that this is a holy line of Adam's posterity. So verse 4, who's up to reading?
Okay, and the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat, getting tired of saying that, and he begat sons and daughters.
All right, 800 years he lived after he had Seth. Keep that in mind. All right, and all the days of Adam lived were 930 years, and he died.
Wow.
Now, through the years, some people have struggled with the idea of people living hundreds of years, and one suggestion that was made is you need to just kind of move the tens place back a little bit, and so he really lived 93 years. 1, no. 2, that's dangerous to do with the Bible. And I'm going to give you an example in just a second. All right, somebody read verse 6.
And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos.
All right, so if you move that decimal point back, it's 10 and a half years old.
No.
We've got a problem in the very next verse. Maybe we shouldn't do that. All right, so verse 7.
And Seth lived after he begat Enos 870 years and begat sons and daughters.
Okay. And keep going.
And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died.
Oh, I should note, and I kind of said this already, the Bible's clear that many other children were born. There were lots of other people roaming the earth at this point, because you also have Cain's posterity going around. But they are having lots of children, and when you have 900 years to do so, you probably don't have like the, mom, dad, 2 kids, little white picket fence. There's probably a little more to it than that. These families were probably like mini towns in and of themselves. What?
She said clans.
There you go. Yeah. All right, so we read verse 8. All the days were Seth were 912, and then he died. All right, next, verse 9.
And Enos lived 98 years and begat Canaan.
Say 98?
It just says 90.
90 years.
Okay. All right, keep going.
And after he brought forth Canaan, Enosh lived 815 years and brought forth sons and daughters.
That's a lot of time. All right, keep going.
Altogether, Enosh lived a total of 905 years, and then died.
Verse 12.
And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Machalai.
Okay. All right. Hop over to the other table. Go ahead, John.
And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalalel 840 years and begat sons and daughters.
Whew. All right, Rhonda.
Because all the days of Canaan were 910 years and he died.
Verse 15.
Lived 60 and 5 years and begat Jared.
Keep going.
After he begot Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had sons and daughters.
Go ahead.
Oh, we know.
Verse 17.
So all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died.
All right, next.
And Jared lived 162 years and begat Enoch.
Wow. A lot of years.
All right.
We're on 18, 19.
Who's up next? Start over. We're on 19.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years and begat sons and daughters.
Now you may notice some of the names, if you're familiar with chapter 4, some of them seem to overlap. You may see some names that seem to be the same. I want to tell you that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the same people. I want to be very clear about that. I mean, some of these people have only heard 20 names in their whole life, so some of them aren't that creative. They use the same name as their cousin. But I just want to I want to specify that, because when you look at Cain's genealogy and when you look at Seth's, there are some names that seem to overlap, but they aren't the same because they don't have the same parents going back or the same kids going forward. Okay, so I want to clarify that. All right, verse 20.
And all the days of Jared were 960 and 2 years, and he died.
All the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. All right. Next.
And Enoch lived 60 and 5 years and begat Methuselah.
Okay.
And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters.
Now, Enoch is given special attention to in this verse in that he walked with God. It was something very specific. This is same kind of terminology used of Samuel the priest. So maybe Enoch had a special relationship with God that some of the other people had not yet up to this point. But remember, all the way back in the time of Enos and Seth, there were people starting to call upon the name of the Lord. So it doesn't mean he was the only one who saved. It just means that he was one of the ones that maybe had an interesting and special relationship with God.
Isn't he the one that has the book that's not in the Bible?
There is a book of Enoch.
Isn't this the one?
I think the idea is that it's supposed to be from him. I don't know that there's good historical evidence that would be his book. It does seem that the book of Enoch would have been well known by the New Testament writers, and there may even be a New Testament passage that refers to something from the book of Enoch, which isn't uncommon. If you go through the Bible, you will see they quote or they will reference other books that are not biblical books, things that are common knowledge to the people at the time. And I think when they quote things, they quote it rightly, and I think sometimes even broken clocks get a couple things right here and there.
Well, I
Twice a
only
day.
say it because it says he walks with God, and in the book of Enoch comes up with stuff that isn't in everything else.
Sure. And I would say you need to test the book of Enoch against the scripture, and so where it would line up, maybe it's true, and where it doesn't, it's definitely not true.
Where do you find this book? Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. Where is it?
Where is the book of Enoch? I don't know where a physical copy is. I'm sure you could get.
Find it, like if you look on the internet.
You could probably buy like a copy of it online.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I
Yeah, but
just.
how do you know that even that's
There's a
valid?
study in the Bible app. It's funny. I've just completed it almost. That talks about the book of Enoch.
Oh, really?
And the cool thing, as you sort of pointed out, is in this particular study, which is good, it only relates scriptural from the New Testament scriptural references to Enoch, right? And so it talks about some of those things, but it's pretty interesting. So
Yeah.
But I don't think in this particular study, I've been doing it, I don't see any contradiction to the scripture, right?
When did they start writing all this down? I thought it was after Enoch. I thought it was pretty much all.
So the first 5 books of the Bible are generally accepted to be written by Moses. So yes, that would definitely be after Enoch. But technically, Job would have been long before Moses too.
Right.
So-
But I read someplace that this has all been passed on orally up to when they started.
See, and part of it could be that, and I'm actually going to get to that a little bit here in a second. But it could be oral passed down, or it could be, Moses spent some time with God on the mountain, and maybe God gave him some truth, not only a bunch of laws, but maybe God gave him the history and a correct understanding of the history at that point. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this would be that he was walking with God and then he was no more, and that wouldn't be people then wanting to walk with God. They should
All right, so verse 23. Who's on?
And all the days of Enoch were 365 years.
All right, and next,
Which one we want?
24.
24. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him.
Okay, so you should note that Enoch only lived about half the time that everybody else did. God did not have him live 800 years and then take him. And you know, I was thinking about that. Why would God do that? I don't know for sure. In my mind, it would be very obvious that he didn't die from old age. Because God didn't let him live out to the end of 900 years and then take him. So there's no question, like, they know Enoch is gone. Like, God took him somehow. One of the commentators said something about he has a full year of years, basically. So he has 365. But they wouldn't have understood that in that time. So that's kind of anachronistic. But anyway. Hebrews 11 talks about him being translated. Go figure, a Hebrews reference. Verse 25.
And Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech.
Okay.
And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begot sons and daughters.
Woo. All right, keep going.
Altogether, Methuselah lived a full of 969 years.
Wow. So, although Methuselah lived the longest, 969 years, he still faced the same curse. Now, maybe he listened to his mom really well. First commandment with promise, if you obey your parents. But I don't know. All I know is he lived 969 and then he went down.
Can you imagine the technology changes he saw? He saw the wheel and
He was probably a part of the process. He was like, here, I gotta, oh, hey. Part of me feels like that would have been invented like by Adam. I don't know that anyone after Adam would have had a whole lot of time, but I don't know. We'll see. Adam would have still had about 165 years left at this point. Adam was still alive.
spring chicken.
All the way up to the days of Methuselah. Adam still had another 165 years. It says, and Lamech lived 182 years, and he had a son.
So Methuselah could have been a righteous man.
Yeah, could have been.
Could have been. I mean, because his death happened right before.
Yeah. So what I was just thinking about as I'm looking at this, his death would have happened before the flood, and then Lamech, his son, also would have died essentially right before the flood.
Or else they would have been on the yard.
Right.
Unless they weren't righteous. Right.
Assumingly, like I said, a lot of people assume this is the righteous line of Seth, which is why you have these specific names. You've got this line going to Noah. I don't know if that's 100% true. I don't know if maybe some of these people weren't righteous and it doesn't talk about it. But if you look at how the last chapter ended to how this chapter runs, it kind of seems like it would make sense. So all the days of Methuselah were 969. Lamech lived 182 years and he begat a son. So this will be the first child that Adam would not have been alive to see. So Adam and Noah would not have met. But think about this. Every other person would have been able to get a personal testimony of the Garden of Eden, of sin, of everything that happened at that point, of the beginning of creation, essentially. Everybody down until Noah.
So all those people that say, oh, it changed, it was passed along,
Yeah, well, it couldn't have because, you had the only overlap here, because he had 165 years left or so, is about 15 to 20 years before Noah was born, he died. That's it. So, everyone through that point would have known the truth. Now, that said, what I found to be pretty interesting, Lamech, like I said, he lived 182 years, begat a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, "This same shall comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord had cursed." Now, they named him, and the reason they named him seemed to have something to do with, relieving them from the curse of God. So it may not be unfair to say there were some, maybe some messianic expectations upon Noah. I don't know if it was completely or it wasn't, and I'm kind of sad that we skipped 4, because I would love to have showed you there seemed to maybe have been that on Cain as well, and Abel. So when, I don't want to get into that right now, but, because I'm going to skip everything I want to talk about next week. But next week we're going to hit 4, and I'm going to show you that may have even been there with Cain as well. So Noah was apparently meant to be one that comforted in response to the curse. Instead, he was the only seed left after God deals with the curse by a global flood, him and his family. Verse 30, it says, "And Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Lamech were 777, and he died." And then it says, "And Noah was 500 years old, and he begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth." Now I would note, Shem, Ham, and Japheth were not triplets. That doesn't mean in the year 500 he had all 3 of these kids, but he started to have them at 500 years old.
He was a late bloomer.
He was a late bloomer. He decided he wanted to wait. So that said, I think someone else had noted that Shem is also not the oldest brother, but he is listed first. So just something kind of interesting there. As we get into the later chapters, we will be able to see that the flood would have happened not 120 years after this. Some of the kids still were not yet 100 years old by the time the flood happened. So that means it didn't take 120 years to build the ark, which some people hear and have heard for most of their life. It would have probably taken somewhere between 55 to 75 years. And part of that we'll know because God covenanted with Noah's whole family, and some of them didn't exist yet, if you say it was 120 years. So thoughts, ideas, there's some things you'll get to see and think about. But Genesis chapter 5, there's a lot of begets, but there's some cool stuff in there. All right.
But you don't know when he tried to save those people from the curse. They just didn't listen.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of people don't listen to Jesus.
Noah, the preacher of righteousness.
Yeah. He kept telling them.
Well, and think about, they have that messianic expectation put on him in some ways. Think about the ways that kind of lines up. He gives them one option for how to be saved. He preaches, they don't listen. And he saves a remnant. You get kind of early types and early pictures of who Jesus would be. That is Genesis chapter 5. All right.
So far you have begat 5 children. How many do you think you will beget?
I don't know if it counts as begetting until they come out. I think we're still at 4 till the next one.
He's there. Is it?
He's
a girl? Is it
he, she, it is there.
Okay.
Hey,
But
it's a baby.
it's a baby. It is. So, but yeah. So I don't know when it technically counts when they say they begot. I don't know if they count from. I would assume
Conception,
it
Well,
very
Jesus
well
was
may
God's
be.
only begotten, and that means conceived. So begat is a form of begotten.
It is. Now the difference I would say is these begets are a Hebrew base as opposed to the Greek one. So I don't know if it would be translated into the same Greek verb if it were like the Septuagint. I don't know. So I don't know how it all works over.
I was making it.
I know.
Split that air.
Maybe it does. Maybe as soon as they know she's pregnant, they count as begetting. I don't know. I get. I'm with you. They were begotten. I get it. The problem is I don't think they'd know right away. So that's right. I forgot that was even on this morning. I didn't think a thing about it. Evening. Oh, I've been playing a Wednesday evening service. We've been walking through Malachi on the Sunday morning stuff. I've been playing sermons through Malachi.
You just got the very end of it, and it gets
Thank you, teacher.
Thanks for coming in.